Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going on a magical journey from 2D to 3D with a very special frog named Whimsy. Whimsy isn't your ordinary amphibian. She's a character born from my imagination, first brought to life through simple pencil strokes. You're about to witness her transform from a basic sketch into a fully realised 3D model. In this video, I'll take you through my creative process step by step. We'll start with my initial concept sketches, where Whimsy began as just a twinkle in my eye. Then we'll dive into Blender, where the real magic happens. You'll see how I build Whimsy's form, add some designs to her skin, and bring personality to her eyes. We'll explore rigging techniques to make her move, and even add some whimsical touches that make her unique. Whether you're an artist, a 3D enthusiast, or just someone who loves frogs, this video has something for everyone. So grab your lily pad and let's jump into the wonderful world of Whimsy. And so I really just enjoy kind of making my characters in Illustrator and just pulling out all of the stops to get something that really reflects the drawing that I've made. In this particular case, you can see that I have drawn on some lined paper with some blue biro. I draw on anything. I find that it's much better when I don't sort of sit with like a totally blank page a lot of the time, or like I'm super precious about the materials that I use. When I do that, I just add extra stress on my plate, and I don't need that, especially because I know that the end result is going to be something 3D, either digital or physical. And so it's just about getting ideas down. And so then normally if I'm like sitting somewhere and all I've got is, a piece of paper and a pen, I will just draw like a full page's worth of characters, and maybe half of those, maybe a third of them, maybe even one of them is good enough for me to turn into a character. But I just really like this workflow of making that 2D rough sketch into something that is 3D and physical and real and solid. I really like as well just going with my line. I'm not a scratchy, sketchy kind of gal. I like just to hard, firm press down on the paper and just make the shapes that I'm instinctively making. You can see here I'm just making the mouth, just the usual pen tool, curve tool, and just mixing and matching depending on what shapes I've made. So sometimes it will just be a simple straight line, and sometimes it will be a curvy curve, but most of the time it's somewhere in the middle. I like to keep the stroke black because it just helps me be able to see the form more clearly. And then the colors that I use in Illustrator, I typically try to keep those colors when I go into Blender. I'm pretty much making all of the design decisions here, and it's just a case of solidifying it literally and spiritually in Blender. But sometimes I will make adjustments if I feel like something isn't working quite well, or if I feel like there could be changes. But I do typically prefer to just go with the flow and keep the rhythm and keep the language of the initial design that I've made. I feel like I'm more often than not happier with the outcome that I've made when I have stuck to, or stuck close enough-ish to, my original concept. When I try and jazz it up, it never has that same harmony. But obviously everyone's different. Some people need to do multiple iterations of something to feel like it looks right. For me, that's a really good way to ensure that I never look at the thing again. And obviously here it's totally not symmetrical at all. It's got, I've drawn it on an angle, and then half of the body is up in the air. But still I keep the shapes the same. You don't really change form that much, even if you're in a weird gymnastic style position. So it's just making sure that I still capture the arms, I still capture the legs, and I still keep the body's language, that I've got the flow and the spirit of the character. And sometimes it takes a few goes to get it right, especially when you're working with really fine points, shapes, and angles. Illustrator tries to clean it up, and sometimes the cleanup may not necessarily be what you want, but then you can use things like the smooth tool to fix things and make them less jaggedy, I guess. And again, just making sure that the frog colors all match. You can see I'm using something called focal tone. It's like a color palette, color library that's built into Illustrator. So if we're using Illustrator, you can use it. And I really like the colors that they use. They all seem to be very harmonious with each other. And I'm not great at color. Color is my thing that I just don't understand. Every time I go and use color theory or watch a color theory video, I don't get it. So yeah. Thankfully, his body is quite straightforward. So it's just, yeah, there's not too much in terms of complications, just the usual body parts that a frog would have. And so I'm just getting this last leg in place, into position. Obviously, it can take a bit of time, but it's just about, do you want to do the hard work at this end where you're just moving some dots around, or do you want to do it later on in Blender? And so you just got to pick your struggle. And in my case, I choose Illustrator every time because it's so much easier to do the 2D adjustments than it is to do the 3D most of the time. And then because his body has been at an angle where he's technically sort of upside down, I'm just making a few tweaks to his body and bringing the legs in to where they're supposed to be in reality, so that they actually look like how they're supposed to look. It's much harder to rig a character when they're already posed, so the best thing to do is make sure that they are in a T pose, so literally having your arms straight out to the side and up with your palms facing downwards. That's pretty much the standard for any character that you make. Some people might use A pose, to be fair, which is having them slightly lower down, but T is pretty good. It works for any auto rigging system that you might want to use, and there's loads of them: AccuRig, Mixamo, Cascada, if you're going to do any physics-based animations. So yeah, just pulling down the body to match. Again, it just doesn't need to be this perfect thing, but if you can get it more perfect, the more perfect, the easier it is. It just means I've tried to make it where the limbs are separate from the body, and it doesn't work. So I typically combine limbs and body together as one thing, and then the head is its own separate entity. So yeah, just getting the character into a T pose position, like I mentioned, flat out with the arms. Sometimes I draw the arms so that you can see the fingers, just because it's one less thing for me to have to model. And I really like the way that Illustrator makes the fingers. Everyone knows who's used Blender at all, fingers or hands are just notoriously hard, maybe almost as hard as they are to actually draw. I find the whole process of making very enjoyable, apart from making the videos. That's probably the only part that I don't love, but actually making the character from the very early stages of just mindless drawing to the 2D bit, choosing the colors, moving things around. It's a really nice process that I feel makes it more enjoyable for me. But I do also have to say that it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I could make things in this way. And I think sometimes maybe I don't realize how much work it takes to actually get to this stage. But I do think it's worth it to be able to have things in your home or have things on your screen that only you could have made, that only you could have uniquely brought to the table. And yeah, it's nice. It's nice. One day you're drawing a frog, and the next day you have, a 3D version, and then maybe you put that into augmented reality, or maybe you spend a day losing the will to live, fighting your 3D printer. But it makes life interesting and it makes things enjoyable. So now I'm just adding, joining the arms and legs to the body, like I mentioned earlier. And it does mean that you have to make some adjustments, move points around to make sure that it flows smoothly. But it's just so that it will work once you get it into Blender. And what I was doing in earlier stages, when I was just trying out variants of characters and things like that, was forgetting to make a neck, which is really annoying when you bring it into Blender, because then you just got like a little, it's like too shruggy, and then you have to try and make one, and then it's annoying. So again, just making sure all the pieces of the puzzle are there and look great. So then the last step is just to duplicate the body. I'm not actually gonna use it, it's just purely for visual purposes at this stage, and it's just adding the leotard in that you see. I will just paint this on and make it a texture versus having lots and lots of layers, because when you have lots and lots of layers, you get clipping when you animate it. So to avoid that, the body and the leotard will not look like one texture or material, but they will be one texture or material. It's obviously something that you can change quite easily, but when it's something skin tight, when it's a skin tight garment, it just makes so much more sense to make them a singular material in Blender. And then the next step is just taking the character as it is, removing the clothing, and just having the character so that I can make it a 3D model. So we're just taking it, moving it out of the way of the 2D version, and taking out some of the elements. So mainly taking off the stroke because it isn't needed, it was just there for a preview, and making some adjustments to the actual outline so that we can 3D it. And I always use the inflate tool for most things, and taking out the depth, inflating both sides. It's kind of just my routine, and it means that the front and the back look the same, so you have a complete shape. Because I need the eyes as like extended pupils for the frog, I'm just making some adjustments so that it will sit nicely inside of the rest of the eyeball. So I guess this is the iris. I actually don't know parts of the eye, but it needs to sit inside the white part, but just sort of neatly, cleanly. So I have to move some dots around, but once I'm happy with that, I can inflate the eyes along with the face. And then the nose and the mouth, I'll redraw those in Blender because I like them to sit flush against the face. And if I try and inflate them with the face, it will push them inwards when they need to come out. So that's that. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just making sure that I have the back of the frog as well as the front, so that I can merge those together as well. So now that we're in Blender, I just scale it up by 10 so that it fits nicely. I have a pre-existing lighting system that I use for most of my characters, and it works most of the time. So I scale everything up by 10 to make sure that it fits, and so that the lights and everything reflect really beautifully. I'm just scaling down the body so that it's a bit slimmer. You can't really control the puff too much in Illustrator, so again, you have to make more of your refinement happen inside of Blender. Then I need to make sure that the front and the back of the head are matched up nicely. So with that, I need to do a few different processes. So one of them is using the Align Objects tool to make sure that they're in alignment on the X and Z axis, and then just manually dragging it back so that they fit nicely, then using a Boolean union so that it all comes together as one singular head shape. I've pulled out the eyes and the nose and the mouth separately just so that I can make that adjustment, and then I'll pull them back in so that they slot nicely into the head, like so. Then for the nose and the mouth, I'm going to be redrawing them using a Bezier curve. And what this does is it allows me to draw directly on the surface of the face, which means that everything sort of sits neatly and is embedded. As it currently stands, the nose and the mouth often don't sit flush, which means that they look weird from the side. And I'm just using the draw tool or the annotate tool to make a rough trace of the shape so that I know what shape I'm going to be making when I make the Bezier curves. Because if I do it with the existing nose and mouth turned on, it will draw the new shapes onto those old nose and mouth options, and I just want it on the face. So I've taken those away, I've hidden those, and then I'll use the Bezier curves to create the new nose and mouth. It sometimes takes a few goes to get right. Mainly what can go wrong is that when I try to bevel the nose, there's too many faces and it doesn't like it. So I just have to go round finally with the point. So the point to the Bezier curve will naturally create a curve versus, the sharp points. Very similar in a way to the curve tool in Illustrator. So it does seem like there's a lot of transfer between the two programs, which I find really useful. And I'm just making sure that it's a complete shape so that I can convert it into make a face and convert it into a mesh, because as it stands, it's a curve. And then just extruding along the y-axis, and you can see that it's sitting inside. Just making an extrusion so that it sits nicely inside the head, and just scaling it down so that it doesn't take up too much space. And then applying a nice subdivision surface modifier to the nose so that it is more smoother looking and a bit more kind of friendly looking. Then remembering to remove any of the lines that I've made with the annotate tool so that, it doesn't actually affect the model at all, but it's just in terms of visibility and making sure that everything looks clear. And I only have what I need. I generally tend, as time goes by, to delete any additional things in my scene that I don't need, whether that's meshes, cameras, lights that I don't need, and here the annotate tool, just to keep it clean and also to keep the file lighter, because files can get really heavy when you just have everything loaded into them. Now I'm making the mouth with the curve, the draw pen, and you can see again it's gone onto the surface. And then I've smoothed out just so that it has a bit more of a crisp feel. And then it's just playing around with the depth. Depending on the size of the model that you've got, you can set it to whatever you need, but just tweaking that until you're happy with it and until it looks smooth as well. The good thing about using the Bezier is that you can do a lot of adjustments with it, and it keeps your geometry really low, but you also have a lot of control. Once you turn it into a mesh, that functionality goes. So it's making sure, again, that you just get it all looking how you want it to look before you commit to converting it into a mesh. So I decided to make a kind of design for the costume of the gymnast Whimsy. And initially I had this idea that I was going to have like diamantes or glitter or whatever, because most of them have lots of like jewels, like Swarovski crystals and things. So I just started making some really rough circles to try and make some sort of idea. But obviously it's a tiny character, so I didn't want to have thousands and thousands of miniature crystals. So I made them a little bit bigger and sort of tried to make them like bubbles to give it that kind of match the feel of the character, because obviously most Olympians have something related to their country as a costume. So for the design of the costume, I wanted it to reflect the life of the frog, and I can't actually remember what I pick in the end. We'll have a look at the end, but it was the idea of having like seaweed, coral, fish. I put a crab in the middle at some point, and getting a design that actually really works for the character. And then for the colour, I stuck with my beloved focal tone palette, but I'm keeping to the blues of the sea and of the bubbles. The crab design is a red design, obviously, and then the fish were orange. I wanted it to have a complementary theme. I do have a tendency to use lots of colours. May not be seen as a bad thing, but some people, they're really good at just using the same colour or three colours. Not I. I like to spice it up. So yeah, I try to use a mixture of different types of blues, oranges, I think reds at some point, to create a coherent design. And then to finish off, I added this kind of crispy crab design to the middle. If you notice, I'm only using one side of the body because I'm going to mirror it on the other side. So I just need to do half of the design and then copy over to the other half of the design. So in substance, I brought in the mirrored design and I just brought it in as like a decal. I think it's an alpha, it could be a texture. But as you can see, you can then control and scale it up to fit nicely onto the character. And you've just got to look around to make sure that it looks okay. And I've had to change the depth so that it fits all the way across the body and doesn't cut off like you can see at the moment. And then once I'm happy with that, I can draw in the body underneath it so that it has a nice colour. And you can see that I'm just keeping to the same colour scheme as what I've got in the Illustrator file. The colours have taken themselves over from Illustrator, which is great for the decals. And you can see there that it's a perfect match, like for like. And then I'm just zooming in. It's really hard around the arms that I've made because they're so small, the joins. It's really hard to get a good even paint job done. And you can use like a tool that will let you do a straight line, but the body is really curved, so it's better to just sort of freehand it. I actually ended up making some adjustments to the character's bodice because I felt like it wasn't really giving me what I needed. And so I put these kind of dotted underlay. So in Illustrator again, I just made a simple circle dot, converted that into a brush, and then I've used paths to just freehand draw and modify different paths so that it has this kind of dotted underlay. It's supposed to represent crystals, but in the end they kind of just have a metallic look, which I think worked quite well for the overall design. And yeah, I'm just making it adjustments to the shape and to the size and to the fit. And then I kept the colour scheme quite consistent, the oranges and the reds and the greens. And then instead of having the crab, I felt like a lily pad was more appropriate for my frog. So that's the design, and a frog for the Olympian gymnast called Whimsy. You can just see me here making the shape, just using an oval and a triangle, that's it. And then just using Pathfinder to cut out that triangle there. So that it's a nice symmetrical-ish lily pad. And then I put like a white hue. I was thinking sort of like a Superman kind of vibe, where there's like a block colour behind the shape just so that it pops a little bit more. So for the final design, I went back to the original colour scheme of the kind of burgundy red for the bodice, because I just felt like it really went nicely with the green and went well with the other colours as well. And you can just see that I'm adding the dots to the background, and it does kind of weirdly look like a skeleton, which wasn't my intent, but it's quite cool. And then I opted to add the original design back on top while removing the crab and putting the lily pad in. And if you notice, my design now looks different. It's missing a head, and that's just because the head had the same material as the body and it was annoying me. So when I re-imported it into Substance Painter, I just brought the body in only because the head was kind of getting in the way. And it's just so nice. It's just so easy to just drag and drop the design onto the shape that you've got. And it's just an SVG from Illustrator. I've dragged into Substance Painter as an asset, and then I can scale it up, scale it down, do whatever I want with it inside of the software. And then the last step in your process is to create an armature. So it's just going to armature, single bone, and just moving around the bone. So I try to use Mixamo, which is what I normally use for humanoid rigs, but I think it couldn't detect the body properly or the face properly, and it was just having loads of issues even when I tried to reduce geometry, etc., etc. I think because of how the eyes are. So I just gave up on that, and I'm just manually making the body. Thankfully, it's a super simple design, so it wasn't stressful. In a way, it probably may have even been quicker if I'd just done that from the jump for this project, but nonetheless, you live and you learn. And with that, the project is complete, and it's time for me to show you the final design for Whimsy, the Olympic gymnast. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you like, and I'll see you again next time.